Hello, friends. This is going to be a unit that introduces you to the concept of tonicization. So, tonicization simply means to treat a chord other than the tonic as a kind of temporary tonic, to tonicize it. This is in contrast to modulation, which is a longer process in which you really move into a new key. You might think of this metaphorically as kind of momentarily acting like you've gone to a new key when you actually haven't. You're actually going to go back where you came from. One of my old professors likes to use the metaphor of walking into a room versus lingering at the threshold. If you go into a room, you sort of stick your head in and look around, that's tonicization. Modulation, you go into a different room and you actually do something. You actually stay there for a little while, make yourself comfortable before you move on to a new key or a new room. So tonicization happens using a tool that we call an applied chord or a secondary chord. I'll say applied dominant or secondary dominant. I tend to use the word applied, but really both of them are in very common circulation, so you should know about both of them. Either the applied dominant or the secondary dominant. And just as that implies, we're going to look for a chord that acts as a dominant to one of the chords that's actually in our key. So, for example, let's say that we're in the key of C major. Let's do it like this. So here's your bass line. Let's say here are your chords above it. Just the standard diatonic chords in C major. If you'd like to follow along with this video, you can go ahead and prepare a little piece of sheet music that looks exactly like this. I'll number my chords. There we go. So, my diatonic chords in C major. Normally, we have our tonic and our dominant. The process of tonicizing is going to be treating a different chord as if it were the tonic, and we do that by means of an applied or secondary dominant. Now, most often, this is going to mean that you're going to alter one of the chords that's actually in the key. You're going to raise one of the notes to act as if it were a temporary leading tone. So what I mean by that can be seen if we look at our dominant to tonic relationship that we often already have. If you're thinking about how a 5 chord resolves to 1, one of the crucial factors there is that the leading tone, scale degree 7, B in this case, T in solfege, is going to go up to the tonic. That's one of the really tonally crucial aspects of a dominant chord. It's something you're always watching out for when you're doing part writing, something you're always listening for when you're hearing music. Other scale degrees are important. The bass goes 5 down to 1. If you've got a 7th on top of the chord, that also has a certain place to go. It needs to go down by step, and it needs to end up on the 3rd of the tonic. But this is the one that we're going to think about for right now. We'll worry about 7ths later. So when you tonicize a chord, when you create an applied or a secondary dominant chord, you're going to alter a chord, most often, in order to make it act like this. In order to make it act as if it was the leading tone. Our real leading tone, B or scale degree 7, goes up to 1. That's how the real dominant and tonic work. And to create a secondary dominant, we're going to look for the chord that is a fifth above where we want to be, and we're going to make sure that it has a temporary leading tone. Most often this entails turning a minor chord into a major chord. So for example, let's say that we want to tonicize 5. This you'll find is the most common tonicization within tonal music. So, 5 down to 1 would be the normal dominant relationship, which means I need to go up and I need to find the chord that would be the dominant of 5. So my 5 chord is a G major chord. I can count up, 1, 2, 3, sort of back around up here to find 4 chords. Going up by fifth, up a second, a third, a fourth, now a fifth. So D is the dominant of G. You can confirm this if you temporarily think about the key of G major as well. What would the 5 in that key be? It would be a D major chord. So to create an applied dominant, what we need to do is turn this 2 chord, DFA, a D minor triad, we need to make it act as if it had a temporary leading tone to G. So we're going to turn that from a minor triad into a major triad. Now, F sharp, our temporary leading tone, gets to lead up to G. F sharp up to G is sort of a temporary local T up to Do. It acts in the same way as the normal leading tone going to the normal tonic would. So now that we've altered this chord, it's no longer a minor 2 chord, right? It's no longer minor. And more importantly, it's no longer acting like a 2 chord. Instead, it's acting like the dominant that points towards 5. So we're actually going to call this chord 5 of 5. Some people actually write that out. You will see textbooks and music theorists who like to write 5 of 5. But usually it's faster and simpler to use this slash notation. Now it's important to note this is a different kind of slash than we use in pop music notation with lead sheets and things like that, where you would say a C chord over E to say that E is in the bass. This is saying something different. This is saying that this is the 5 of our normal 5 chord. So it's not saying, put a 5 chord with a 5 chord in the bass or something like that. This is saying something different. It's an abbreviation of 5 of 5. So that's really the simple version of how you create an applied or a secondary dominant. You can do this for most of the diatonic chords. All you need to do is go through and think temporarily in that key in order to figure out what the applied or secondary dominant is going to be. So for example, if you want to find 5 of 6, there are a couple ways to do it. First of all, we have our 6 chord. We could count up a second, a third, back around here, a fourth, a fifth. We can find that our E minor 3 chord is the chord that we need to change. So we turn it from E minor into E major by adding a G sharp right there. That becomes 5 of 6. The other thing you could do is to actually go and kind of think in the key of A minor for a moment and say, okay, if I'm in A minor, then what is the 5 of this chord? It's an E major chord because you're going to raise the G sharp leading tone when you're in A minor. So there's sort of 2 ways to think about it. You can either think through the diatonic chords and find the one that is a fifth above and will resolve down to your target chord, or you can kind of temporarily think in that key. And that sort of models what's actually going on here. If you were to modulate, you would really move into the key of A minor and actually, give a cadence there and maybe a melody there. Here, we're just kind of temporarily borrowing it. We're thinking in A minor for a very limited amount of time. So you would be turning this 3 chord from E minor into E major, and that is going to let it resolve here as, say, 5 of 6. And that's the basics of the concept of secondary dominance. You can do this on most chords, but I'll tell you that there are a couple of little exceptions. You generally won't be able to tonicize 7 because, the diminished triad doesn't have a fifth. It has a diminished fifth rather than a perfect fifth, and it doesn't imply a scale. You can't go and think, what if I were in B diminished now, like we did about A minor or G major, for example. It doesn't support a key, and therefore it can't really be tonicized. You would need to do something chromatic if you were going to go find, the F sharp chord that could tonicize B. But that won't happen. The other quirk is that if you want to tonicize 4, if you count all the way up, you'll find that you need to alter the tonic chord, and the tonic chord is already a major chord. So the trick here is that you really need to use a 7th. You really need to add a 7th on top of your tonic chord, turn it into a sort of dominant chord sound, and that will let you treat it as 5 of 4. So 5 of 4 always works a little bit differently. We'll look at that a little later to talk about how to deal with that. But just finally to recap, this is a very simple process where we select a new target chord that we want to treat temporarily as a tonic, and we work backwards and find what the dominant leading to that chord would be, what the new leading tone is. We change the note, the third, in order to act like a temporary leading tone, and this allows us to tonicize that chord for a limited amount of time. So it's a very simple concept, but it's really, really powerful. You'll find it used in all kinds of musical styles. It can be used to add a little bit of emphasis to a chord. It can be used if you need an extra chord in the middle here for rhythmic or metric reasons. We'll definitely look at that in a future lecture. And finally, it can sort of open the door, figuratively, to refer back to that other metaphor. It can open the door to modulating to another key for a longer amount of time. So this simple concept is something that you should practice a lot and get really good at. Find how to find 5 of 2, 5 of 3, 5 of 6, 5 of 5, things like that. Really start to think about how to get into these other keys and learn to recognize the signs of 5 going down to 1, and more importantly, an accidental that raises the note and sort of acts like a leading tone temporarily.